We are in Daf Chav Tes Amid Base, 29b. Today's Daf is Daf Lamed 30, and we're in the middle of the Gemara is giving a measure for each item, how much is needed for an Eruv Techumin, for an Eruv that's outside of the city to become a Shvisa, to establish your Shabbos outside of the city, so you can travel beyond the 2,000 Amma for a mitzvah. So, shtisa, if what you're using is a beverage that we saw in the Gemara and Brachas, it's made out of toasted flour, toasted wheat flour, and honey, and it was made as a medicinal drink sometimes. So, Amar Vacha, our Pinchas Terei, you need 2 tarvadin, shtei trei shargushi. This 2 measures of this. Now kisani, and this is toasted oats, a toasted grain. Amar Abaye trei buni the pumpadisa, 2 measures buni of pumpadisa. Amar Abaye, and once we mentioned it, Abaye says about my mother. He often mentions his stepmother, who was a healer, and quotes some medicinal ideas from her. So my mother said, Hani kasani malu liliba umevatli machshavta. It is good for your heart, and it takes away overthinking something. That's machshavta means, so a worry when somebody is concerned about something. But Abaye said, my mother said, Hamanda isli chusha liba. If somebody has a weak heart, take some meat from the right thigh, the dichra of a ram, velaisi kivui dereisa denisen, and bring some spring dung, animal waste. Ve'ileka kivui dereisa said, if you don't have animal waste, so then laisi sugaisa darvis, then use willow twigs. And burn it up so you can make coals out of it. Then you roast the meat on it, and then drink wine that is diluted chamer marka after it, and that'll help. Rabbi Tzvi Fischer says this is a general rule for all these measures. Anything that is lifton, meaning that is eaten together with something else. So something that's eaten in a bread, so a burger. So you wouldn't need enough for a burger itself, but because it's eaten in a roll, it's eaten in a bun, so and with other things in it. So it's how much you would need for a meal if you had all the other things, even if you don't have it in the meal. So you only need that much that you would have in 2 meals of that one item. However, she'ena lifta, that which is not eaten with something else, it's eaten alone as a main, as much as you would eat from it. So the Gemara says, for instance, basar chai. Usually basar chai means raw meat, and that's not the case, as the Rashba says. You can't have raw meat because it has to be edible. Whatever you're making the eruv of has to be edible, and raw meat's not edible. And even though there are some people that eat it, it's batal l'daita, it's kollel. Most people don't eat it. It wouldn't count as a proper meal because most people don't. Even the people that do would be nullified by it. But in any case, it seems like basar chai means meat that isn't specially prepared in a way that you would then would be eaten differently. Either it's salted or just plain cooked. So since it's eaten alone, so then you would need kedei lecha meno, as you need enough for 2 meals from the meat itself. However, basar tzli, but roast beef, which usually will be eaten with bread, so then you only need as much as you would eat in the bread. So Rabba kedei lechol bay, but yet Rabba says it's as much as you would eat of it alone because it's still meat and you eat it alone. However, Rabbi kedei lechol meno. Rabba says kedei lechol bay, it's as much as you would eat this together with your bread, and whereas Rabbi Yosef said kedei lechol meno, it's how much you would eat of it alone. Rabbi Yosef, Manamino. So where Rabbi Yosef says, how do I know that that this is true? Because if you see the Persians, they eat roast beef without bread. They don't put it on a sandwich. Abai said, so what? Because you found one place in the Persians that they do that, that's why you're gonna rule that way? Are they Ruba the Alma? Are they the majority of the world? Well, Tanan, we learned that we don't follow some other group, what some other people do. We look at each person or each place, what they do. But Tanan, we learned big da'aniyim la'aniyim, big da'ashirim la'ashirim. In regards to what size a garment would have to be, what size of a patch of cloth would count as a garment. So we say for poor people who use patches, it's 3 fingers by 3 fingers. For rich people who wouldn't and would only use a kerchief, so then it would have to be 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim. So we see for each person, depending on what they are, what their situation is. So don't tell me what the Persians do. We'd have to look at this person or this place and see whether or not they would eat they eat it that way or not. And so if you would eat it, if they would eat it together with bread, so then it would count how much they would eat together with bread. If they would eat it by itself, so how much would they eat if they eat it by itself? I have a big dashirim laniim like, and now we're on Lamed Amen Aleph 38. So the Gemara says, but we see that the garments for rich people, meaning a kerchief, is not what's required in order for something to be tummy for a poor person. So for them it's even less. And we see that we always go by them. So to over here, the Persians would not define what is or isn't eaten with bread. And if you're going to tell me no, maybe over here we're strict that we say you need a larger amount of meat because we found somebody that eats it that way. The Persians eat it alone, so you need to have enough meat to eat it alone, as much as you would eat alone. That's what's required for the Eruv. And over there, in regards to Tumah, we're going to be strict for the poor people and say for them it goes by the smaller size. No, that's not true. But Rabbi Shimon Elazar said that for an Eruv, we're going to look at each person. We're going to say, okay, if this person is sickly or elderly and they can't eat that much, so it's as much as they need. And so, and for Ularabsa, and for somebody who is a glutton, meaning somebody that eats a lot, there we're going to be lenient to say an average meal. So for somebody who can't eat that much, we're going to be lenient to say we're going to go with the smaller, with what they eat. And for somebody who eats a lot, we're going to say what an average meal looks like, and that's going to be sufficient, even though they themselves would generally eat more. So we see that we're lenient for an Eruv, and we tell and for an elderly person, we're going to give them whatever their 2 meals are. So we see that we're not going to be strict. We're going to be lenient, and we're going to go either by the lesser of 2 measures, either what this person typically eats, or what generally is eaten, and the lesser of those. So we see we're lenient in regards to Eruv. Kasha. So this is a question to the interpretation of Rav Yosef, who want to compare it to the Persians. Now we're going to challenge the statement that Rav Shimon Elazar said that for a sickly person, we're going to go by how much 2 meals that they can eat, and for a Ravsam, for a very a person that can eat a lot, and still we're only going to go by the general measure. And is that really true? Because in regards to Tumah, in Tumas Ohel, we saw the halacha multiple times now that if there's someone in the house and you want and that's deceased, so we want to know where the tumah is going out of, which door, which exit, which window is the tumah going out to and going into the next space. So if we know where this person is going to be taken out from, so it's only through that doorway, and also the vessels that are in that doorway, only that doorway is going to be tummy. However, if we don't know where they're going out from, so any opening even it would transfer the tumah. Vatani we learn Shimon Elazar Og, the king of Bashan, which is just a euphemism for a giant, somebody who's a very large person. So there, the opening that is the only opening that this person could fit through is we now know which exit this person is going to be carried out from, and therefore whatever's in that doorway is tummy, and everything else is not tummy. And so Abai responds, and he says, "Hasam hechid levit." Over there, that's not a proof, because what are you going to do? It's the only doorway this large person fits through. So hadumi na'ad me'manafke. What, you want to dismember him before you take him out? Of course, we're going to just carry him out from the one doorway that he can get through. But over here, so therefore we can be lenient based on that particular person's needs or that particular situation. But in our case, in Eruv, it differs, and we should go by a general term. The Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Shimon Elazar or not in regards to this large person. So Tashma, Rabbi Yochanan said, that Rabbi Shimon Elazar, Rabbi Yochanan said that if there was a very large person, so the opening is in 4 tefachim. So the Gemara says, so you see that it's small. The Gemara says, Hasam the ikab sachem ktanim tuva. There, the point is that there are smaller openings, even less than 4 tefachim. Mekachad the havi arba, and there's one that is 4, as long as it's at least 4. The vada kikam marvech ba'hu kamarvech. You're going to have to open it up anyhow in order to get him out. And the one that you're going to open up, and the doorway that you can open up, is likely the one that's already the largest, and that's what he's saying. As long as it has at least 4 tefachim, we're going to say that that's the one you're going to be going through, and it'll save the openings and the tumah from transferring through all the other openings. Rav said that you can use basar chai, you can use raw meat, or as we said that from the Rishonim, it's probably not raw meat, but plain meat. That's cooked somehow, edible, but not in any special way. You can have raw eggs, and how much? Rabbi Yosef, who was called Sinai, because he was very well versed in Mishnayos, says 2. The term Sinai v'okar haram are 2 terms. Sinai being somebody who has a breadth of knowledge, and okar haram somebody who has a depth of knowledge. We mentioned it yesterday in Ben Azai in the Shuk, Ben Azai in the marketplace, and Sinai meaning Sinai, somebody who has the knowledge of all Torah that's given at Sinai. Okar haram is the one that can uproot the mountains, meaning that knows the depth of the mountain as well, not only the information that was given on the mountain, but also the depth of understanding of what's in it. And Rav Yosef was a Sinai because he knew many of the Mishnayos, and so he said that he was often called Sinai, and he says 2. Now, the conclusion over here is that from any food type, you can use any food type, besides for water, salt, and we saw maybe a couple of exclusions like maybe mushrooms, etc. So any food type is allowed to be used, and it's how much of that would be used in 2 meals, but any food type. And so halachically today, what's often used in metropolitan areas where people sometimes travel or walk on Shabbos to hospitals or places like that, where there's a mitzvah to go beyond the halachic space that you have. So they put a container of spices. So let's say black pepper, right? Because how much black pepper do you need for 2 meals? And that's something that lasts from week to week. And so there are people that go to the hospital every week to visit people or whatever other needs there may be. But there's a mitzvah there, so they can travel. So they're allowed to travel beyond and make an Eruv. So that Eruv is placed there and that's their meal, and it's let's say a container of spice, because that's enough for 2 meals. Anything that is that amount, that for that particular food, food item, it's enough for 2 meals. The Gemara, it goes back to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah had said that similarly, just as for an Eruv, you can't use water or salt. If somebody makes an oath, a neder from mazon,
I'm just remembering when we made
also going to be a exclusion that it can have water and salt, because those are not mazon, those are not food items. Now, there's different terms here that are going to be a little bit hard to define, but there's mazon, something that is food, hazan, something that satiates, and that nuance in a neder, in an oath, is going to be the difference of whether or not we're looking for something that actually is food versus something that actually satiates versus something that can fill you but not give you strength, not really nourish you. And we're going to see that there are various terms here that we're looking for in a neder to define what would be included or excluded of that term. Is it really true that only salt and water are not considered mazon, but everything else is considered mazon, food? Let's say this is a contradiction to both Rav and Shmuel. The Rav and Shmuel Damar Tavai, because both Rav and Shmuel would say, you only say creator of mine mizonos, the creator of types of mazon, types of, let's say, foods, right, for the 5 grains, but anything else not. So you see that there is a specific term mazon, which applies to the 5 grains: wheat, oat, wheat, barley, oat, spelt, and rye. Didn't we already challenge this once in the Gemara in Brachos? Let's say this too is a contradiction to them. From this, Gemara said, Amar Rav Huna said, no, our Mishnah is talking about because our Mishnah is talking about that everything is prohibited besides for salt and water because of his oath, is when the person said, I forbid upon myself it's not anything that's mazon, anything that's food or a certain type of food, or rather anything that satiates. And that, so since he said anything that satiates, that means anything that could really, you can eat enough of it that you'd be full, besides for water and salt, because they are both, they're not mazon, they're not called this term mazon, they're also not satiate. So it says, but everything else you could become full from. So it says, is that really true? Everything else you can become full from? Rabbi Chana said, right? Rabbi Chana is a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is the head of the academy in Eretz Yisrael, and he says, when I followed Rabbi Yochanan to eat the fruits of the ginosa, which is the Kinneret fruits that were around the Kinneret at that time, and they were delightful, delicious fruit. And when we were 100, kol chad v'chad asora asora, that everybody would take 10 baskets. Where we were 10, if there were 10 people, they would get baskets, hundreds. In other words, it was just such plenty of this produce. And 100 of them could not fit in a basket, but tlosa of 3 sa. And yet we ate all of them. And to that he said, I tell you that even though that these are delicious fruit, there's so much, I'm still not satiated. I'm still hungry. I still want more. So we see that there are fruits that are so good that they simply don't satiate. You don't have enough of it. By the way, Michael sent me an article about the regeneration of the fruits of Ginosa. It's a fascinating study, a work that people are doing to regenerate this. And in a similar vein, Rick sent me yesterday an article about the 2,000-year-old pit or seed of a palm tree from 2,000 years ago that has been regenerated, and they now have this palm giving off fruit. So there's a lot of that coming back. But pears ginosa, the fruits of ginosa are these delightful, delicious food, but they don't satiate. So we see that there are foods that you can't have enough of. You don't become full. Amen. So the Gemara says perhaps there's a distinction.
They do a taste testing. It's called a
blood. Maybe it's mezona. It fills you. It doesn't fill you, but it gives you nourishment. If somebody says an oath, not a neder. A neder is where you prohibit a certain item upon yourself. Instead, this person made an oath. I swear I will not eat this. So that's a prohibition upon myself, not on the item itself. And it says, I swear I won't do this. So it's a prohibitive action. So you can make an eruv for him with it. However, if he said, kikar, however, if he said, kikar zu alai, that this item is prohibited to me, this bread is prohibited to me, you're not allowed to make an eruv with it. Because then he can't even have benefit from there's nothing else that he can do with it. And similar to wine, like to a nazir, it's like wine to a nazir, wine to a nazirite who took the nazir neder. So we ask a question. Someone who takes a neder out of bread, you could make an eruv for him with it. My lav. And what do you say? The amar alai, that he said it is prohibited upon me, and because that's the general term of a neder. A neder is prohibiting the item upon yourself, and by doing so, he would prohibit benefit from this item, and yet it's going to be permissible to make an eruv on account of that. When a person says this, he means I'm not going to eat it. The main form of benefit from a bread is eating, and that's what I mean when I say it's prohibited upon me. It's prohibited for me to eat that, but it doesn't mean that I can't have other benefit from it, and therefore I should be able to use it for an eruv. So Gemara says, "Loi da amar zu." He didn't say it is prohibited to me. The item is prohibited to me, but rather it means what he said is I will not eat this. And it's actually logical that that's what the price is talking about. The Ketani Sefer, because we said at the end of that price, when he said, I swear I will not taste it. But if he said it's incumbent upon me, meaning this is prohibited to me, well, if that's the case, that if he changed the terms and said, but if he said kikar zu alai, this loaf of bread is prohibited to me, then indeed he can't use it as an eruv. Well, then why don't we make that distinction in the Bryce itself? If he said that this belongs to hektash, you can't use it for an eruv, which is changing from a personal prohibition to a general prohibition that it goes to eruv, that it goes to the hektash. Why did the Bryce make that distinction between if I prohibited it for myself versus prohibited to everyone because I donated to the Beis HaMikdash? Make a distinction within myself. I prohibit it to myself by saying, I swear I'm not going to eat it. That's going to still be a good eruv. And if I say I prohibit this bread upon myself, that to me it's a prohibited item, then I'm not allowed to use an eruv. Make that distinction in the Bryce itself, and since it didn't, is proof that indeed the Bryce is not making that distinction.
I thought we said I thought we said what?
The reason we can't use something you donated to Beis Hamikdash because you can't use hekdesh for eruv. Make the distinction itself. Now, when you prohibit something for yourself and it still be prohibited, when you said this, I swear not to eat this. And you can use it as an eruv. Amar a lie. But if he says this item is prohibited upon me, then you're not allowed to use it as an eruv. So Rav Huna says, my sound goes off. Was somebody asking a question?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I just noticed my sound was off. Sorry.
Well, thanks for turning me off. But no, I was asking. We said that wine for Nazir was perfectly fine for Nehruv, and also Truma for a non-Kohen.
Well, two opinions, right? We're going to see a little more about that in a moment.
Oh, so this is according to the okay.
That's what the question over here is. Is this the same as that or not? And as we said before, just like for yayin for a nazir, just like wine for a nazir is going to be okay, even though he cannot have any benefit from it. So too, if I say this is prohibited upon me, and to which the Gemara wants to make that distinction, say no, only if I'm not going to allowed to eat it, but I could have some other benefit from it. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, Elamai kol heicha the Amar alai ma'arvin. If a person says that item is prohibited to me, and yet I'm allowed to make an eruv, kasheration. So then I have a question of the beginning, because at the beginning it says, when is this? When he said shavua shalei tamena, I take an oath that I will not taste it. I swear I won't taste it. But seemingly, if I said the item itself is prohibited to me, that would be permissible and good eruv. So what we have to say is chasura mechsur, that the brisa is being shorthand is not giving us as much information as it means to give, and there's something missing in the text, and this is what it would be. And this is what the brisa means, even though the text is short. Somebody who takes a neder from bread, regardless of whether he says, I'm not going to benefit from it, or he says, I swear I won't eat it. And even if he says the item itself is prohibited to me. Because that's like he says, I swear I will not, I swear I will not eat it. And the general term for benefit is only eating, and since he's only not going to eat it, he's going to be he still has an ability to have other benefit from it. Therefore, it's permissible to eat. Permissible to use. And Rashi here says the reason is because a general way of eating, a general way of benefiting from it is eating. And when he says it's prohibited to me, what he means is I won't eat it, but he could have other benefits from it. Rashi later says another reason on account of mitzvahs lav lahenas. We know that the only reason somebody's allowed to make an eruv in order to travel beyond the 2,000 amma outside of his city, outside of his place, is for a mitzvah. And so that's not considered a benefit, even though that I have to benefit from the meal, but the meal benefit is secondary to the primary benefit, which is the ability to go do the mitzvah beyond 2,000 amma, to go visit the sick, to go to listen to the drash, etc. In any case, it's a question to Rav Huna. What is the, as Rav Huna said, in the name of Rav, that there's a distinction between if he says neder or shavua. If he says, I swear I won't eat it, then it's a good, you can use it as an eruv. If he says, this item is prohibited upon me, then you can't use it. So he says, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says, if I take an oath and I say, I swear I will not eat this bread, you can use it as an eruv. Now, kikazu alai, if I say this loaf of bread is prohibited to me, that loaf is now unusable in any way, and you cannot use it as an eruv. And Gemara says, really? Is this really the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer? By the time we learned Zaklal, this is the general rule in oaths. Adam isa atzmei ba'oichel ma'arvin leba. If a person had prohibited food for himself, so then you can use it as an eruv. But food that becomes prohibited to a person, if he said this is prohibited upon me, or he says I swear an oath that I will not benefit from this. Now it's not based on action for himself, but rather it's based on a benefit, and this is going to be a benefit for him. So you can't use it as you can't use it as an eruv because there's a prohibition of benefit. So you see that when he said this is prohibited to me, it's going to be prohibited to use as an eruv. And that to that Rabbi Eliezer Omer kikazu alai ma'amar lebil. If a person said this loaf of bread is prohibited to me, you may use it as an eruv, and it would work as we just said, because either it means the main intent of the prohibition of benefit is food benefit, and so I can use it as an eruv, or because it's a mitzvah. It's because I'm only making an eruv for a mitzvah, and therefore I'm allowed to benefit from it because mitzvahs lav lehemes, and the mitzvahs are not made as a personal benefit; they're a mitzvah. In any case, if he said hektish, if he says he donates to the Beis Hamikdash and now it's prohibited in any benefit, now you're not allowed to make it as an eruv. Because you're not allowed to make an eruv out of hektish. In any case, so we have a contradiction. One place, Rabbi Eliezer says that if somebody says this bread is prohibited to me, you're not allowed to use it as an eruv anymore. And in one place, Rabbi Eliezer says no, you are. Since he only said this item is prohibited to me and didn't say specifically to any benefit, so then he can have the benefit of an eruv with it. So there are two opinions what Rabbi Eliezer's opinion was. So this is the idea that we saw in the Mishnah and was mentioned before, that even though a Nazir who took upon themselves the oath of a Nazir that cannot benefit from any wine or grape, even the skins and the pits and it may not become tummy, etc. Yet they can use wine for an eruv. So masnita deloke b'shamay. So our mission is not like b'shamay. The Tanya b'shamay say ma'arvin l'nazir b'yayin only Yisrael b'truma. You may not use wine for an eruv for a nazir. Similarly, you may not use teruma, which only a kohen is allowed to eat, or as an eruv for a non-kohen. Beis say ma'arvin l'nazir b'yayin. No, you can use wine as an eruv for a nazir, and Yisrael b'truma, and teruma can be used for a non-kohen. Basil said B'Shamai, I can prove it to you. Wouldn't you agree? Now we go to Lamed Amud Beis. Wouldn't you agree? Even on Yom Kippur, we know that you're allowed to make an eruv. Now, on Yom Kippur, nobody can eat, and well, children can, but an adult can, and that's why even for an adult, we can make an eruv before Yom Kippur, set a meal between the 2,000 at the 2,000 amma mark, so the person can travel 4,000 amma from the city to the next city where the shul is, etc. And even though you can't eat on Yom Kippur, so it doesn't have to be a practical meal for them to eat that day. It just has to be that by doing so, they define that as their space because they have a meal there. So too over here, it doesn't have to be a meal that I can eat this Shabbos. It doesn't have to be wine that I can drink this Shabbos. It happens to be a Nazir, but there is a meal there that defines my space. Amr lehen avon. Yes, I do. We do agree that for Yom Kippur you can make an eruv. Amr lehen kashem shem amr legalah b'Yom Kippur. Well, just as you can make an eruv for an adult at Yom Kippur, even though he can't eat the food that was set there as the eruv, came amr lenazir b'yayin. So too you can use wine for a nazir ul yisrael b'teruma, and you can use teruma for a non-kohen. Ubei and Beishamai make a distinction. Say no comparison. Hasam ikasudaruya b'bodyo. By Yom Kippur, at the onset of Yom Kippur, this food was available to the person, and that's why when they set it on Erev Yom Kippur, right before Yantiv, they set the Eruv, 2,000 Amma outside of the city, as a way to travel to the shul, yeah, at that moment that they put it down, it was food for them. And in fact, that day is actually a mitzvah to eat. So they had a meal and it was available for them and they had a reason to eat it. So that defines their space. But Erev Shabbos, that a Nazir takes a bottle of wine and puts it down there and he can't even have it right then. How can that define the space? So they say, even at the time that you're setting the Eruv, it's not edible. Come on, the Lekhanan. And whose opinion is this? This is not like a Hanani. This it says that Beishamai would agree that you can make an Eruv with a meal for Erev Yom Kippur, etc. The Tanya, because Hananiah was even stricter in general in the name of Beishamai. Now, the Tanya we learned Hananiah said, "Kol atzman sheBeishamai lo yamodim be'eruv achi yotzim mitosav v'chol kli tashmisha l'sham." Beishamai held you can't make an Eruv by just having a symbolic meal there, meaning you have not your actual space, but you just put a meal there to show that this is, I want to be Kodesh Shvis, I want this to be defined my Shabbos space. Rather, what the Beis Shammai say, in order to have an Eruv, you have to have taken out your bed and all of your utensils. You have to have set up a campsite, basically. Kamana Hazah the Tanya. Well, whose opinion is this price? We learn that if when you were wearing dark clothing, when you went out to make the Eruv, and you put down your stuff, and this is what you were wearing, when you set your shvisa for Shabbos, you set your space, and then you came back home, you can't change your clothing on Shabbos to a different garment and have that your space, because that you only change in your own space. So you have to go back, and you can't wear the whites. And similar, if you were wearing white, you can't wear dark. Come on. This is the opinion of Hanani, according to Beishamai, that the definition of your space is not by just a symbolic meal, a few apples or 2 pomegranates. That's not going to be enough. 2 meals worth of pomegranates. No, you have to actually move out there. According to Hanania, what you're saying is that he can't go out with a change of clothes, but he can go out with the same clothes. Well, what do you mean he's going out of the city with that? His all his garments, his bed is there, out there. What it means is, if he made the Eruv and he went out there and he was sitting out there as the sun set before Shabbos, he was there with all his stuff. He was camping at the place that he made. It was kind of shvisa. And now he needs dark clothing. You can't change what you have. You can't even go out with the white clothing. You can't change. You have to be stationed and remain out there. Come on. And this is the opinion of Hanani Beishamai, that you actually have to physically move out there with enough stuff to live there, in order that Beishamai say that's the only way to make an Eruv out there. But the halacha is obviously like Beis Hillel, that all you need is a mazen shtei sudas, 2 meals worth of food of that particular item. And if it's typically not eaten alone, but rather as a part of the rest of the meal, something that, whether it's spices or dip, you only need 2 meals worth of that. So if you're making your Eruv with hummus, it's how much hummus would be eaten for the one person in 2 meals. Sumcha said, no, you need chulin, you need non-teruma. You can't have teruma for a non-kohen. Seemingly, he doesn't disagree about the first part, which is that the Mishnah had said two foods that are not available to the person themselves. One is if he's a Nazir, whether he can use wine. And the second is if he's a non-Kohen, whether he can use teruma, which only a Kohen is allowed to eat. Sumcha seemingly only said, you have to have chulin. It has to be non-teruma, meaning that a Nazir may have wine. What's the distinction? He's not disagreeing in regards to a Nazir using wine. either way, it's not edible to the person himself. So what's the distinction? My time. The Gemara says, "Efshad the Mitchell on Niziruse," because he can on Shabbos. He has a way to drink the wine. He can go to a Beis Din and ask them to annul his vow of Nazirus and retroactively permit it. The Gemara says, "If that's the case, Teruma Nami after the Mitchell Alavei." Well, then Teruma as well, he can retroactively annul his separation.
Where does Ein Danim B'Shabbos fit in here?
Sorry?
Where does Ein Danim B'Shabbos fit in here?
The fact is that there's a heter of Hataras Nadarim for a Tzorach mitzvah, which is why he's traveling. There is Hataras Nadarim. You could have a nullification of the vow. So what about Truma? Truma, you can do the same. You can annul the statement. Truma essentially is a statement of vow. What's the vow? I'm uttering and saying this part of my entire pile of grain. This is going to be the teruma. This is the gift. But I can annul that, and then it goes back to being untithed or untrumad, and then I can go back and I have to do it again. So this is called tevel. It'll go back to its pre-teruma state, which I'm not allowed to eat either way. But it would be, but I could undo the teruma. So when it says, yeah, but there was a problem. In Mitchell of a hadr lativlit, if you nullify it, so then it goes back to being inedible on a different reason, not because it's only a kohen can eat it, but even a kohen can't eat it. It hasn't been tithed, it hasn't been terumad, and then it's prohibited to be eaten. Okay, so what? So he undoes the teruma, and now everybody can't eat it. And then I can use some grains that I have at home and make that the teruma with the intent of it covering even the grains, even the meal that's out there. So Gemara says, no. That the halacha is not to do that on account of people won't know, and it could come to mistakes, and so therefore always teruma should be made when the both items that which you're taking as teruma as the uplifting part, and the grains that are going to become permissible because of the teruma are all next to each other. And chaverim, we don't expect that somebody would transgress that. So why didn't you take teruma within it itself? In other words, you have, let's say, he made a nice bread, and that's what he has out there as his meal, and it's made of teruma grain. Annul that statement, make it non-teruma. Now it eventually will be permissible to everyone, and then take off a small piece and say that's teruma, and the rest of the loaf is going to be permissible. The les b'shiura. There's not enough. Amai paska. How do you know that? What gives that you decide that is specifically talking about that teruma? Simchas is disagreeing about because you can't annul it. Why can't you annul it? Because it happens to be talking about a small roll, and there's not enough to take teruma from. And therefore, if you take teruma, there won't be enough for 2 meals. And that's specifically the case of simchas. Like Gemara says, simchas like Rabban. Rather, the reason is simchas follows a opinion of Rabbanon. The Amri called Dovashum Mishvus Gavel Bein Hashmoshes. That anything that is at the time of the onset of Shabbos is rabbinically prohibited. That is prohibited. That means it's not edible at that time. And we'll see a machlokas about it tomorrow. And that's what's going on here. Since midrabanan, rabbinically, there's a prohibition of creating teruma on Shabbos, of separating teruma on Shabbos, because you are fixing a prohibited item and making it permissible. So that's a me'ein malacha, similar to a malacha of completing something. And since that is prohibited, midrabanan said at the onset of Shabbos, you can't make teruma. That makes it prohibited at the onset of Shabbos. And tomorrow we'll see this idea of not fixing something on Shabbos, and the idea that at the moment of the onset of Shabbos, when you're making your Eruv, it has to be that there are no rabbinic prohibitions, for sure not a Torah prohibition, but even a rabbinic prohibition on the Eruv.